Welcome back to my YouTube channel, ladies and gents. We are back with another debate. Actually, this is just a continuation of whether or not the sacrifice at the Mass is a propitiatory sacrifice. Now, I apologize. I might stumble over my words. That's because I'm a little bit wired on an energy drink, on an empty stomach. I highly do not recommend that. But nevertheless, um, this is going to be the second cross-examinations. Dr. James White edition. And without any further ado, I'm not going to waste your time because this one's a good one, even though we do kind of stray off quite a bit. Let's get into it.
All right, Joe, I'm sure you're familiar with John O'Brien's work, The Faith of Millions.
Can you hear me now? Okay,
We
sorry.
can hear you
Yes,
now.
I am.
You now work for Verizon. So you're familiar with the book, The Faith of Millions by John O'Brien.
I am.
Would you agree with his statement, and I guess I have to say this, from last century? Sounds so old now.
Well, it's also like almost 100 years. It's an early 20th century book. Go ahead.
It's back there. When the priest announces the tremendous words of consecration, he reaches up into the heavens, brings Christ down from his throne, and places him upon our altar to be offered up again as a victim for the sins of man. It is a power greater than that of saints and angels, greater than that of seraphim and cherubim.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say you have not read the book. Is that fair?
Of course I've read the book.
Okay, then you would know that part is in the section on the priesthood and not on the Eucharist.
Yes.
That, taken literally, that is not Catholic teaching.
I don't think you could take that in any way that would make that Catholic teaching. Let's see.
Because it would deny that Christ's local presence remain in heaven. So when we talk about transubstantiation, you talk about this like it's like complicated theological language. All that's saying is that the substance of the bread and wine becomes the substance of the body and blood of Christ. But other properties that aren't substantial, we're not claiming that. So it still looks like bread, still tastes like bread, but also location is an accident. And so in his section on the Eucharist, O'Brien explicitly acknowledges that Christ is not present in the Eucharist dimensionally. He's using poetic language and talking about the priesthood that, taken in a non-poetic way, would contradict not only Catholic teaching, but O'Brien himself.
So
I haven't read the book, so I guess we're left to take his words at face value. Seems like a pretty credible source, and this is a problem that I tend to have, even as a Catholic. Why not just say things the way they're intended to be translated? And that's a rightful point that Dr. James White brought up, because when you're contending against so many people who go against what the church teaches, and then you find phrases that are complicated. Granted, Joe spends, this is his life, right? Who am I to argue with him? Then again, who am I to argue with Dr. James White? I see the perspective where he's coming from. Unfortunately, the church is made up of humans, and humans can definitely do a much better job of rewording and clarifying things in such a way that it doesn't come off as if we're blasphemers,
He says, of what sublime dignity is the office of the Christian priest, who is thus privileged to act as the ambassador and vicegerent of Christ on earth. He continues the essential ministry of Christ. He teaches the faithful the authority of Christ. He pardons the penitent sinner with the power of Christ. He offers up again the same sacrifice of adoration and atonement. I guess, could we agree that that would be the propitiatory aspect?
Yeah, that's right.
Which Christ offered on Calvary. No wonder that the name which spiritual writers are especially fond of applying to the priest is that of alter Christus, for the priest is and should be another Christ.
Yeah, so Christian
you're
means
only
like little Christ, right?
Yeah.
All of us share in the threefold office of priest, prophet, and king. And so if you follow Isaiah 66, that some Christians share in the priesthood of Christ in a special way, then it makes sense. This is not a priesthood apart from Christ. They're sharing in the priesthood of Christ.
I understand that. The point here, however, is that, as we were talking about in the previous section, the necessity of the sacramental priesthood to bring about, would you say the sacramental priesthood is necessary to bring about the propitiatory aspect of the Mass in light of the doctrine of transubstantiation? If you don't have the doctrine of transubstantiation, do you still have the propitiatory aspect?
You need the reality of transubstantiation, but you can find, for instance, Eastern Orthodox writers talking about the propitiatory nature of the divine liturgy. They don't use the language of transubstantiation, but they're affirming the same reality.
All right, I take back what I said about that phrase. Once he clarified it, it makes sense. Importance of reading the whole document. My bad. I was worried for a second. I'm not gonna lie. I was worried for a second. I was like,
Okay, but you would agree that there are some pretty important distinctions between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy in its view.
On this point, despite our differences in areas of theology, is the liturgy a propitiatory sacrifice? The Eastern Orthodox agree.
Well, liturgy or the actual...
well, I'm saying liturgy because Mass is the Western term, divine liturgy is the Eastern term. If you want to say Mass, that's fine.
True, but...
So, for
okay,
instance,
I'm not
the
gonna...
Russian Orthodox theologian, proto-presbyter Michael Pomazansky, in his Orthodox dogmatic theology, says, quote, "The Eucharist is likewise a propitiatory sacrifice for all members of the Church." It's pretty unambiguous. He goes on and says that from the beginning of Christianity, the bloodless sacrifice was offered for the remembrance of both the living and the dead, and for the remission of their sins. This is evident from the texts of all the liturgies, beginning with the liturgy of the Holy Apostle James, your namesake.
So the bloodless sacrifice is still propitiatory. How can that be in light of the teaching of Hebrews that without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins?
That's a good question. This is what I was trying to
explain. Yes, it is a good question.
I know.
Thank you. That's exciting.
I'm trying to explain. Like,
Try not to knock your drink over.
When Jesus goes up to heaven and he presents the offering of Good Friday to the Father, he's not dying again.
Right.
So you can have that offering. It's a priestly thing. It's part of the same sacrifice. Like, if you understand why Passover was both on the 14th and the 15th day of the month, then you can understand why Holy Thursday and Good Friday and the ascension into heaven are all critical for understanding the sacramental nature and the sacrificial nature of what Christ has done for us. Like, the problem is we don't understand the way sacrifice works. There's no one in the early church, like not one Jewish convert, not one pagan convert, makes any of the arguments you're making because they know how sacrifice works.
What do you mean? Wait.
Yeah.
You're making a pretty big claim there.
I
They don't make.
I can back it. I can back it up.
Since I'm making the argument of the book of Hebrews, they did make that argument.
Yes, we absolutely believe in Hebrews. We don't understand Hebrews in such a way that we think it contradicts the propitiatory nature of the Mass.
Okay, so
and this is every early father before the Council of Nicaea. The Anglican liturgical scholar Gregory Dix, in his book Shape of the Liturgy, says there is no pre-Nicene father, Eastern or Western, whose Eucharistic doctrine is at all fully stated, who does not regard the offering and the consecration of the Eucharist as the present action of our Lord himself.
Right.
That the sacrificial action is ongoing. And then he goes on, in the overwhelming majority of writers, it is made clear that their whole conception, he means of the Eucharist, revolves around the figure of the high priest in the altar in heaven. Like, there's a reason the book of Revelation still describes an altar in heaven, because there's still the presentation in heaven and on earth of what Christ has done once for all on Good Friday.
Okay, so do you not see that when you're looking at Hebrews, what you just said, you are told, in light of the current form of Roman Catholic theology, this is the teaching of the church. How could you look at Hebrews and see anything that would contradict your ultimate authority?
I just quoted an Anglican telling you what the Christians before the year 300 believed. Are you saying that he's like so informed by Catholicism that like the Pope is making him think that?
No.
He's a liturgical scholar looking at the ancient liturgy.
Okay. Let me finish the question so that we can actually get to it. That Anglican scholar was not saying that the early church held to transubstantiation, the Mass, and that this created propitiation, which meant that you can come to the Mass thousands of times in your life and still die impure. There's a huge difference between. There's a huge difference. Is there not? Is there not a huge difference? Okay. Is there not a huge difference between the concept of real presence in the supper and the modern concept in Roman Catholicism that developed over time? Or do you not believe in development in this area? You believe in development in the papacy, maybe? Do you believe
On this point, we find first-century evidence that they believed in the sacrificial nature of the Eucharist. You said in your debate against
when you say,
you needed transubstantiation.
Wait.
If you're right, then the first-century fathers talking about the sacrifice of the Mass must have believed in transubstantiation by your own logic.
Okay, so you are asserting that if sacrificial language is used, it's being understood in the way that it's understood, say, at the Council of Trent, or even Fourth Lateran Council, because now you have transubstantiation in the Fourth Lateran Council. You do not believe that there was development?
No, on this point, when you hear
so
an
all the way
Anglican
back
saying
then, you're actually
unanimity of the pre-Nicene fathers on this point, there's no development at all. We see not one iota of difference. Now, you find other Eucharistic questions that become clearer, the mode of presence and all of that, on the sacrificial nature, which is what we're debating. We're not debating transubstantiation. We're debating the propitiatory nature of the sacrifice. That part is absolutely unambiguously clear.
So you are making the assertion that you can actually you can separate out the issues of priesthood, which was developmental,
I don't believe it was development. You're asserting that.
That is how many of your own scholars admit that?
Liberal Catholics would be like me citing to liberal
Catholics.
I'm just saying, like, I could point to liberal Presbyterians, and you wouldn't take that as any authority.
I'm talking about historian.
I'm
talking about okay. Why did Newman have to come up with his development hypothesis if there wasn't any development? You seem to be asserting there was.
There are absolutely issues that develop, and we have greater clarity. The wills of Christ.
I'll say this. I see where Dr. James is coming from. Even as a Catholic, I can see where he's coming from. Because the term transubstantiation itself might not have been used by the early church fathers, right? One would argue that that's a word that developed over time. So technically, is that a development? You take it the way you want. The concept was there. The real presence in the Eucharist of Christ. Hence, the sacrificial nature of the Mass. And yes, Joe's right. The debate is whether or not the Mass is a sacrifice, right? A participation in Christ's sacrifice on the cross. But in terms of separating it, because there's so many moving parts. You've got the priest who is needed in order for transubstantiation to even occur, because priest acts in the person of Christ. When he says the words, transubstantiation occurs. For lack of a better term, as I've said in previous videos, the bread and the wine transform. Now, technically, it's not a transformation, but transubstantiation, right? The substance changes. That's where you end up with the different word plays. I really do appreciate conversations like this, because you're forced to contend with so many different moving parts that sometimes stray off. That's kind of the way my mind works, you know? Oh, another analogy of the way I view it. In terms of many of the doctrines, even sacrificial nature of the Mass, things tend to develop over time. I think you might see that later on. But think of it like a wheel, right? Primitive wheels versus modern day wheels. They both do the same thing. The difference is we have better, more refined, well-developed wheels today, right? The materials are specifically designed for durability, longevity, and for those that study them, a more complex understanding, right? You can get deeper into the idea of a wheel. Many of the doctrines are the same way.
If you were to read just fathers from the first 200 years, you won't find clear understanding.
How about the papacy?
Sure, the papacy, and like the role and authority of the papacy becomes clearer over time.
How about infallibility? Marian dogmas?
A lot of things. I mean, I'm giving the example of the Trinity and the nature of Christ.
So things that the church...
I'm saying development of doctrine is true for Catholics and Protestants alike.
So things that have been
not every issue develops.
So things that have been dogmatized had to develop. But the one thing...
Not as a rule.
The bodily assumption?
I'm saying not as a rule. Like, you can't say things that are dogmatized, therefore... Like, when we talk about the divinity of Christ, that is dogmatically held. That is not a development. That was believed by the earliest Christians. So, all of the universal evidence points to the early Christians believing Christ was divine, right?
Well, of course.
Okay. They also believed the Eucharist was a sacrifice.
Okay.
So the fact that something is a dogma doesn't mean it necessarily developed.
Do you not recognize that you keep equivocating on the term sacrifice?
No.
You don't see that?
Because I can point you to fathers who explicitly call it a propitiation. Like, you think, I remember this from your debate with Jerry Matitix, you claim it's not till Fourth Lateran in 1215, or sometime a little bit before that, right? Like 1,000 years.
Transubstantiation.
Okay, and you say transubstantiation is needed to have a propitiatory model.
Well, certainly O'Brien agreed with me.
Okay, great. So if I can point you to early church fathers who speak explicitly of it being propitiatory, will you concede that those points are false? Like your timeline is clearly
No,
untrue
because
here.
okay,
So
you're asking
even if it uses the word propitiatory.
Just something to add. The reason why he doesn't want to concede to what the early church fathers believed is, you see this time and time again with a lot of Protestants. A lot of Protestants would want to go to the Bible in order to get exactly what the apostles, only the apostles, believed, without realizing that everything the apostles believed may not have been written down in the Bible. That's why ideas tend to pass down verbally. Culturally speaking, stories are told, right? And even their students, many of them, their students of students of students, wrote down the teachings. So to say that I'm going to completely ignore what this early church father wrote solely because I can't find it in the Bible, that's why you end up with a problem of second guessing yourself, or doctrines that tend not to make too much sense once you investigate them a little further. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, I'm asking the questions,
Okay.
Joe. I've given you free reign. I really have to just run over me when I'm trying to ask you
Go ahead.
questions. So I'm going to have to
Go ahead.
slow you down there because that's what you're doing. You do not see that there is a difference between using sacrificial language when you're talking about a sacrifice and using and presenting the idea that there is a limited propitiatory effect in the representation of what you call the Mass by a priest. You don't see any.
There are different types of sacrifice. You have, for instance, sacrifices of praise. On that point, we agree. You have the kind of bodily sacrifices Romans 12:1 talks about. So I totally understand there are different types of sacrifices. My argument, and the argument of scholars who've studied the early church on this, and I'm happy to give you a whole slew of direct, you can read them for yourself, citations. The type of sacrifice the early Christians believed the Mass was the one sacrifice of Christ for the forgiveness of sins.
Okay, for example, you put a lot of weight initially in Malachi chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
For from the rising of the sun even to its setting, my name will be great among the nations, and in every place incense is going to be presented to my name, as well as a grain offering that is clean, for my name will be great among the nations, says Yahweh of hosts. Are incense offerings propitiatory?
That by itself, the incense, no.
Are grain offerings propitiatory?
In this context, because they're prefiguring the Eucharist.
Well, that's your understanding, but were grain offerings under the Mosaic covenant propitiatory? Was there a blood?
No.
Does grain bleed?
You need the actual shedding of blood. You're right.
Right. So can you explain why it is that the key text that you presented there does not present propitiatory sacrifices?
Because it is not just a grain offering, it is also the shedding of blood. Hebrews 9 talks about this. So what the Old Testament doesn't...
Where in Malachi 1? I'm missing that.
I said Hebrews 9. That's in the New Testament.
I'm reading you Malachi 1.
I know. I'm saying... So, for instance, if you were to talk about the virgin birth, and you were to point back to Isaiah 7,
Yeah.
that is a prophecy of the virgin birth, but doesn't tell us everything about it.
Of course not. But
So,
if this is being fulfilled, and you put a lot of weight on this, a lot of writers do, but it's not the part that keeps being missed is the propitiatory aspect.
The shedding of blood. I see where he's coming from. No. I see where he's coming from. The reason why we as Catholics can claim the Eucharist to be propitiatory, or the nature of the Mass to be propitiatory, because think of it as an extension of the blood shed on the cross, right? The one and the same. We're sacramentally participating in that sacrifice. Now, with the grain, it's kind of hard to make that connection, because Joe just admitted that the grain was propitiatory. But then again, nowhere do we see the shedding of blood in Malachi, as he'd pointed out. So how are you getting to the conclusion of the grain being propitiatory if there was no shedding of blood to make it propitiatory. Does that make sense? So, in other words, sin gets cleaned by the shedding of blood. If there is no shedding of blood, how can sin get cleaned? Nah, that's good. That's good. I see where it's coming from. I see where it's coming from.
Yes, I understand that that's your argument. My point is that the early Christians, whether you agree with them or not, viewed this explicitly as a propitiatory sacrifice.
Well, and the same thing, the other text you used in Isaiah.
Okay, so to some degree, there's a little bit of faith in that sense. Whether for you as the individual, you trust in what the early church fathers believed, considering all the well-rounded evidence that they understood sacrifices as involving the shedding of blood, even though there is nothing explicitly pointing to that. Okay, I see. Nah, this is a good one. He brings up very valid points. No, he brings up very valid points.
Oh, good grief. Isaiah chapter 66. Who keeps making that clock go faster? In Isaiah chapter 66, this is the quotation. You only gave it to me. You didn't read it, and you didn't have time to, I imagine. But
that's right.
In Isaiah 66, 21, I will also take some of them for priests and for Levites, says Yahweh. But who is the them? If you look back, it says, they will declare my glory among the nations. Then they shall bring all your brothers from all the nations as a grain offering to Yahweh on horses and chariots, in litters, on mules, and on camels, to my holy mountain Jerusalem, says Yahweh, just as the sons of Israel bring their grain offering in a clean vessel to the house of Yahweh. So again, what did the New Testament writers, and I'll finish this, did the New Testament writers interpret these texts the way you do?
I don't know in Isaiah 66, absolutely in terms of the fulfillment of Malachi being sacrificial, 1 Corinthians 10. But there is no direct citation, I think, in either case to talk about what the first century evidence tells us, within just the canon alone, if that's your argument.
All right.
So oh my goodness. That was good. So there you have it. It's more of an appeal to the early church fathers, what the early church fathers believed versus what they said. Considering you're dealing with Jewish individuals who understood sacrifice from not only a killing of an animal but the consumption of the animal as well. But then looking at their surrounded writings to be like, okay, they view these as sacrifices, therefore I guess we have to accept them as sacrifices, even though it contradicts what is explicitly written, if that makes sense. Now, I see where that raises problems, but then again, I'm inclined to go back to why it's very important to look at surrounding documents and understand the traditions that were passed down outside of the Bible. When you try and utilize only one source of information as a way to understand a whole culture, unless that source explicitly writes down in detail everything that was done in an explicit manner, you have to go beyond that source, whether it be through word of mouth, different writings, compare the different sources in order to get to. So I see where Dr. James White is coming from and his approach of utilizing sola scriptura, but then again, I'm inclined to go with Joe on this one. His approach makes the most sense. You might not be able to understand why they viewed a grain offering as propitiatory or a sacrifice, but the fact that they did it, it's kind of like the pyramids. I've been watching videos on the pyramids as well. Oh, so many theories on how the pyramids were built. But then again, we have the pyramids, right? We don't know how they came to be built, at least no definitive way of knowing how they came to be built. But the one thing that I think we can all agree on is that they were built. You just take it at what it is. So, that was good. That was good. And this is why I like conversations like this, because not only do you get to understand the different perspectives that other people have out there, but you just learn more. You do. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. Drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and God bless you guys.